Alyssa died 8 years ago. Perhaps it's time for you to face the past.
With the announcement trailer of Resident Evil Requiem, Capcom has provided some of the first hints about the story being told in the 9th mainline entry in the Resident Evil series. The trailer didn't include any of the series' familiar faces, but it did suggest that Requiem has ties with a lesser-known Resident Evil game from way back in the PlayStation 2 era.
Resident Evil Outbreak.
Outbreak was released in 2003 between Resident Evil 3 in 1999 and the franchise's semi-reboot with Resident Evil 4 in 2005, and shook up the series' formula up to that point. Instead of a single-player experience, Outbreak was Resident Evil's first major foray into online cooperative gameplay, with as many as 4 players fighting to survive the T-virus outbreak in Raccoon City that serves as the setting for Resident Evil 2 and 3. While Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and Jill Valentine were fighting for their lives in places like the Raccoon City Police Department, Outbreak puts players elsewhere in the city.
No, it can't be. So many.
Outbreak follows a group of residents as they suddenly find themselves in the thick of things as Raccoon City is overrun by zombies and, well, other mutated monstrosities. There's also a big emphasis on teamwork, using character-specific traits and abilities alongside Resident Evil's survival horror elements, like limited inventory space, slow-moving characters, and largely fixed camera angles to encourage players to work together to survive. Outbreak also introduced an insidious element to players' fight for survival. Characters are all infected with one of Umbrella's deadly monster-making viruses at the start of each of the game's levels. The infection rate in each character increases over time and ramps up even faster when they take damage, forcing players to search for antiviral items. If the virus overtakes a character, well, they transform into zombies themselves and attack their former allies. It's a little bit difficult to get a complete story picture from Outbreak or its sequel, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, which featured the same cast of characters. The games each include a series of 5 scenarios, with players picking from the 8 possible survivors and trying to make their way through a level. But the scenarios aren't presented in chronological order, or even necessarily linked together as a coherent story. One scenario has characters drinking in Jay's bar in Raccoon City when the first zombies stumble in and starts biting people, for instance, while another scenario finds the survivors stumbling into an underground Umbrella lab, working through the Raccoon City Zoo filled with mutated animals, or making their way into the Arkley Mountains and eventually to a hospital overrun by a giant murderous plant. But thanks to the trailer for Resident Evil Requiem, we know that at least some of what takes place in Outbreak and File 2 is now canonical to the Resident Evil series, and important to the events of the next game. The Requiem trailer begins by introducing FBI analyst Grace Ashcroft, a new character to the series as she receives an assignment to investigate the Wrenwood Hotel. We quickly learn that Grace's mother, Alyssa Ashcroft, was murdered at the hotel 8 years earlier. Alyssa was one of the playable characters in the Outbreak games, and they give a little backstory about her that might inform what we see in Requiem. In Outbreak, Alyssa is a reporter and you can find her bylines in the newspapers, the Daily Raccoon, and Comet News. She's presented as a dedicated investigator, but her dialogue suggests that because of the Umbrella Corporation's control and influence in Raccoon City, she hasn't always been able to publish pieces that could have exposed the company's wrongdoing. In the sequel, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, there's an Alyssa-focused level that gives a greater sense of her work as a journalist, as well as the lengths Umbrella has gone to in order to cover up its crimes. The scenario, Flashback, finds Alyssa and the other survivors heading into a private hospital in the Arkley Mountains outside of the city. As she makes her way to the hospital, Alyssa keeps feeling like she's been to the place before as part of an article she was pursuing, but can't seem to remember the details. She later discovers, through flashbacks and files you uncover along the way, that she was right about that strange feeling. Years earlier, another journalist, Kurt, had become convinced doctors at the hospital were using Umbrella drugs to conduct illegal experiments on the patients there, and Alyssa followed him as he went there in search of evidence. In the course of his investigation, Alyssa saw Kurt eaten alive by one of the virus-infected patients. Umbrella then used its massive influence with police and local officials to cover up the deaths at the hospital, including Kurt's. Alyssa eventually remembers what happened to her through the course of flashback, and uncovers the truth of the experiments, including one performed by the hospital administrator on his own terminally ill wife, which led her to seemingly transform into the carnivorous plant that infests the hospital. Over the years, the administrator has been leading people who wander into the woods to the hospital, killing them and feeding them to the plant. Alyssa and the other survivors defeat the administrator and destroy the plant. And with her memory somewhat restored, Alyssa vows to spread the word of Umbrella's wrongdoing and what happened to Kurt. Other scenarios in both games have the survivors eventually curing their viral infection and escaping Raccoon City before the US government destroys it with a missile to contain the outbreak. You can see the missile crater in the Resident Evil Requiem trailer. In File 2, each character gets an epilogue scene if they make it out, and Alyssa's scene suggests that, like Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, she made it her mission to blow the whistle on Umbrella.
Playing it safe may be best, but that's not what I call truly living. Fight for what you want. There's always going to be risks. You may get hurt in the end. But for me, I'd rather die having lived than live without knowing life. And taking the risks that come with life is the only way to truly know it.
Eventually, she did write an article all about the horror she learned in Raccoon City, but in the end, the story is mostly buried, thanks to the cover-up perpetrated by the US government to hide its involvement with Umbrella and what happened in Raccoon City. It's not clear if any of the other Outbreak characters canonically survived Raccoon City, as Alyssa is the only one who's been mentioned in other games. You can even find an article she wrote in Resident Evil 7 detailing the many disappearances in Dolby Parish, Louisiana, where the game takes place. And now with her mention in Resident Evil Requiem, we know that, in the years after Raccoon City, she raised a daughter before she met her ultimate fate. Requiem's trailer suggests we'll learn more about Alyssa through Grace, as well as by heading to the hotel where she was murdered. The trailer also implies that Requiem might take players back to the ruins of Raccoon City, highlighting iconic locations like the Raccoon City Police Department. So while it's not clear now, it's possible other elements of Outbreak's story could also be relevant to what happens in Requiem, but we have to wait until its release in February to find out. Either way, it's cool to finally see the events of a less remembered Resident Evil game more or less canonized by the Resident Evil Requiem announcement. Furthermore, it appears that after detours in zombified Europe and the Deep South, Resident Evil is ready to head back to the city where it all began, Raccoon City. For more on Resident Evil, be sure to check out our hands-on preview of Capcom's 9th mainline Resident Evil game. For everything else, you're already in the right place with IGN.